The room was filled with a strange mix of confidence and tension, the kind that hangs in the air when powerful people believe they are untouchable. The Marine general stood at the center of it all, relaxed, almost amused, his uniform crisp, his posture flawless, his face carrying the faintest smile. He had faced wars, tribunals, and enemies who wanted him dead, so a room full of officials meant little to him. When the discussion turned toward restructuring, accountability, and the quiet whispers of elimination from command, he chuckled softly, as if it were an inside joke only he truly understood. He leaned back, folded his hands, and joked about how many times people had tried to end his career already. Laughter followed, polite but nervous, the kind people give when they are unsure whether laughing is safe. To him, it seemed like another moment where fear disguised itself as authority. He believed he had seen it all. What he did not realize was that this time, the room was waiting for him to stop talking. Asterisk across the table sat a man who had not laughed. He was younger, calm, his expression unreadable, his presence almost invisible until the silence began to stretch. He had no medals displayed, no dramatic posture, no need to assert himself. While others shifted in their seats, checking reactions, calculating alliances, this man simply listened. His eyes stayed focused, not on the general, but on the weight of every word being spoken. When the general finished his joke, expecting applause, or at least agreement, the laughter faded quickly, leaving behind an uncomfortable quiet. The general raised an eyebrow, surprised by how fast the mood changed. He looked around, searching for reassurance, but found only lowered gazes and stiff expressions. The calm man finally spoke, his voice steady, controlled, and quiet enough that everyone leaned forward to hear him. He did not insult, threaten, or accuse. He simply asked a single question, delivered without emotion, without force, but with absolute precision. Asterisk, he asked whether the general believed survival was the same as victory. The question landed like a blade, sharp and unexpected. The general's smile froze. He had been prepared for arguments, challenges, even open hostility, but not this. The calm man continued, explaining that escaping elimination was not proof of righteousness, nor was longevity a measure of honor. He spoke of responsibility, of consequences delayed but never erased, of systems that appear slow only because they are patient. Every sentence was measured, deliberate, impossible to dismiss. The room seemed smaller now, as if the walls themselves were listening. The general attempted to respond with another joke, but the words felt heavy in his mouth. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar creeping in. Asterisk, the calm man did not raise his voice. He did not accuse the general of crimes or failures directly. Instead, he spoke about leadership as a debt that must eventually be paid. He spoke about the difference between fear and respect, about how fear demands silence while respect invites scrutiny. Each phrase stripped away a layer of the general's confidence, exposing the truth beneath the uniform. The officials who had laughed earlier now sat completely still. No one interrupted. No one dared. The power in the room had shifted, not through authority, but through clarity. The general realized that this man was not there to fight him. He was there to end the illusion that the general still controlled the narrative. Asterisk memories surfaced in the general's mind, moments he had buried under victories and commendations. Orders given too easily, lives reduced to statistics, decisions justified by necessity. He had always believed history would remember him kindly because history was written by survivors. But now, faced with a man who spoke as if history itself were sitting in judgment, that belief began to crumble. The calm man paused, allowing the silence to do the work. It was unbearable. The general cleared his throat, attempting to reclaim authority, but even he could hear how hollow his voice sounded. He said that elimination was just a rumor, another political game. The calm man nodded, acknowledging the statement without agreement. Asterisk, then he delivered his answer, the one that silenced the entire room completely. He said elimination was not about removing a man from a position, but about removing the protection that allowed his mistakes to remain hidden. He said that when protection ends, truth no longer needs permission to speak. No one breathed. The general stared at him, searching for anger, arrogance, anything he could attack, but found none. There was only calm certainty. In that moment, the general understood something far more terrifying than defeat. He understood inevitability. Asterisk. The calm man concluded by stating that jokes are often made when fear is present, but unacknowledged. He said true confidence does not need humor as armor. He thanked the general for his service, not as flattery, but as closure. The meeting ended shortly after, not because a decision was announced, but because nothing more needed to be said. People stood slowly, quietly, as if leaving a courtroom after a verdict. The general remained seated for a moment, his hands no longer steady. He had not been eliminated that day, at least not officially. But as the room emptied, he knew something irreversible had happened. His power no longer lived in the room with him. Asterisk. As he finally stood and adjusted his uniform, he felt the weight of every rank on his shoulders. For the first time, they felt heavy. Outside, the world continued as always, unaware of the quiet shift that had taken place. No headlines would capture this moment. No cameras had recorded it. Yet it was the moment that would define everything that followed. The general walked out, no longer smiling, while the calm man stayed behind briefly, gathering his notes, his expression unchanged. He had not come to destroy a man. He had come to remind everyone that silence is not the same as absence, and accountability does not announce itself with noise. Sometimes, one calm answer is enough to end an era. The corridor outside the meeting room felt colder than before, though nothing about the building had changed. The Marine general walked slowly, his steps measured, his face carefully composed for anyone who might be watching. Decades of discipline ensured that no crack appeared in his posture, yet inside his thoughts moved in unfamiliar directions. The calm answer still echoed in his mind, not loud, not dramatic, but relentless. He had survived ambushes, political storms, and internal rivalries, but this was different. This had not been an attack, it was exposure. For the first time, he wondered whether the confidence he wore so easily had been nothing more than habit reinforced by fear from others. Asterisk. Back in his office, surrounded by awards and photographs, the silence felt heavier than the crowded room had. Each medal on the wall represented a moment when his authority had gone unquestioned. He had once believed that unquestioned authority was the ultimate proof of leadership. Now that belief felt fragile. He poured himself a glass of water, noticing a slight tremor in his hand before steadying it. He told himself that meetings ended without consequences all the time, that calm words meant nothing without formal action. Yet he could not shake the sense that something fundamental had shifted. It was as if a line had been drawn, invisible, but absolute, separating who he had been from who he was becoming. Asterisk. Elsewhere in the building, conversations unfolded in low voices. Officials who once sought the general's approval now spoke with careful neutrality. No one openly challenged him, but no one rushed to defend him either. The calm man's words had not accused, but they had reframed everything. Survival was no longer the metric. Silence was no longer loyalty. People began revisiting old decisions, not aloud, but internally, wondering how history might judge them if protection disappeared. The atmosphere of the institution subtly changed, like a current shifting beneath a still surface. The calm man returned to his own workspace, unremarkable and modest, compared to the general's office. He sat down, reviewed his notes, and closed the folder without urgency. He had expected resistance, perhaps anger, but none had come. That was how he knew the message had landed. He understood power well enough to know that it rarely collapses under pressure. It collapses under understanding. He did not feel victorious. There was no satisfaction in what he had done. His role was not to dismantle individuals, but to correct systems that mistook endurance for virtue. Days passed, and nothing happened publicly. The general continued attending briefings, issuing orders, maintaining appearances. Yet small changes became noticeable to those who observed closely. Invitations arrived later than usual. Briefings felt shorter. Decisions that once sailed through unquestioned now returned with requests for clarification. Each request was polite, procedural, and devastating. Accountability had begun to operate quietly. The general responded professionally, but each response reminded him that the protection he once enjoyed was thinning. Late one evening, alone in his office, he opened a drawer he had not touched in years. Inside were old documents, handwritten notes, personal records from earlier stages of his career. He read through them slowly, encountering a younger version of himself who believed fiercely in purpose and responsibility. That man had not joked about elimination. That man had feared becoming careless. The realization unsettled him more than any accusation could have. Somewhere along the way, certainty had replaced reflection. He had mistaken longevity for righteousness. Meanwhile, the calm man was called into another meeting, this time smaller, quieter, more focused. He was asked questions about process, about principles, about how accountability could exist without spectacle. He answered as he always did, calmly, precisely, without ambition. He explained that systems fail when they rely on personalities rather than standards. He said that leadership must remain uncomfortable to remain honest. Those listening nodded, not because they agreed entirely, but because the logic left no room for dismissal. Rumors began circulating, vague and cautious. Not of removal, but of review. Not of punishment, but of evaluation. The general heard them, of course. He had always been well informed. Yet hearing them now felt different. They were no longer whispers meant to flatter or warn. They were neutral observations, detached from emotion. That detachment frightened him. Fear he could fight. Indifference he could not. One morning, he was asked to provide context for a past operation. The request was formal, routine in tone. He complied, presenting his reasoning with the confidence of experience. When questions followed, they were respectful but thorough. No one challenged his authority directly. They challenged the assumptions beneath it. He answered carefully, realizing with each response that explanations which once satisfied everyone now felt incomplete. He saw it in their eyes. They were not judging him. They were measuring him. As weeks went by, the general's jokes disappeared. Meetings grew quieter when he spoke, not out of fear, but attentiveness. He noticed it and did not know how to feel about it. Part of him resented the shift. Another part recognized its necessity. Leadership without scrutiny had allowed him to drift. That truth was difficult to accept, but impossible to deny. The calm answer had not silenced the room merely in that moment. It had changed how people listened afterward. One evening, the general encountered the calm man in the hallway. There were no witnesses nearby. For a moment, neither spoke. The general considered saying something sharp, something defensive, but found no energy for it. Instead, he asked a simple question, whether the calm man believed change was possible without destruction. The calm man looked at him steadily and replied that change without destruction is the only kind that lasts. The exchange was brief, understated, and profound. They went their separate ways without ceremony. That night, the general slept poorly. Dreams of past commands blurred with imagined futures. He woke before dawn with a clarity he had not felt in years. He understood that elimination was no longer the threat. Irrelevance was. To remain relevant, he would have to change. Not publicly, not dramatically, but internally. The institution no longer needed his dominance. It needed his honesty. By the time the sun rose, he had made a quiet decision. Whether or not the system removed him, he would no longer hide behind jokes or rank. He would confront questions directly, acknowledge uncertainty, and accept scrutiny. It was not redemption. It was responsibility reclaimed. Somewhere else in the building, the calm man began his day as usual, unaware of the general's thoughts. He did not need to know. The system was doing what it was meant to do. The silence that had once protected power was now making space for truth. And that transformation, though invisible to the outside world, was irreversible. The change did not announce itself with ceremonies or declarations. It moved quietly, settling into routines, altering expectations without demanding attention. The Marine general began to notice that his words carried a different weight now, not heavier, but sharper. When he spoke, people listened for meaning rather than permission. That realization unsettled him at first, then slowly reshaped him. He stopped preparing statements designed to impress and began preparing explanations meant to withstand examination. Each day felt like standing before an unseen mirror, forced to confront not how he appeared, but who he was becoming. The institution adjusted around him. Processes once rushed became deliberate. Decisions once justified by urgency were now questioned for necessity. The general found himself participating in discussions rather than dominating them. At times his instincts urged him to reclaim the old rhythm, to assert authority and move on. Yet each time he remembered the calm answer and the silence that followed it. That memory acted as a restraint not imposed from outside, but chosen. He began to understand that restraint was not weakness. It was discipline of a higher order. Observers from outside would have seen nothing remarkable. Reports were filed. Meetings were held. Operations continued. But within those ordinary actions, a subtle recalibration was taking place. Younger officers spoke more freely. Analysts challenged assumptions without fear of reprisal. The general listened, sometimes uncomfortably, sometimes appreciatively. He realized that the respect he now received was different from before. It was not automatic. It had to be earned repeatedly. That realization exhausted him and energized him at the same time. The calm man remained consistent, almost deliberately unremarkable. He did not seek recognition for the shift that had begun. When asked about the changes, he framed them as collective progress, never personal influence. He believed deeply that systems should not depend on individual courage alone. They should be built to encourage honesty even when courage fails. His calmness was not an absence of conviction, but evidence of it. He trusted process more than personality, and that trust slowly infected those around him. At one point, a review panel concluded its work on a matter tied loosely to the general's past decisions. The findings were balanced, acknowledging complexity rather than assigning blame. When the results were shared, the general felt an unexpected sense of relief. Not because he had been cleared, but because the truth had been allowed to stand without distortion. He addressed the panel afterward, accepting responsibility where appropriate, explaining context where necessary, and resisting the urge to defend himself excessively. It was the hardest thing he had done in years. It was also the most honest. Word of this approach spread quietly. Not as praise, but as example. Others began to follow suit, recognizing that survival within the institution no longer depended on silence or alignment, but on integrity. The culture continued to shift, incrementally, almost imperceptibly. No single moment could be pointed to as the turning point, yet everyone who mattered knew when it had begun. It had begun with a joke, followed by a calm answer, followed by silence that refused to be ignored. The general eventually stood before a group of new officers, tasked with speaking about leadership. He considered repeating the familiar lines about strength, decisiveness, and loyalty. Instead, he spoke about accountability and the danger of confusing endurance with virtue. He spoke about how humor can be used to deflect responsibility and how true confidence allows questions to exist. The room listened closely. Some were surprised. Others were inspired. The general himself was changed by the words as he spoke them, as if hearing his own truth for the first time. Afterward, alone once more, he reflected on the path that had brought him there. Elimination had once seemed like the ultimate threat, the end of relevance and purpose. Now he understood that elimination could also mean removal of illusion, stripping away false certainty to reveal something more durable. He had not been eliminated from his position, but he had been eliminated from a version of himself that no longer served anyone, least of all the institution he claimed to protect. The calm man watched these developments from a distance, neither proud nor detached. He believed that the best outcomes are those that do not require guardianship. When asked whether he thought the general's transformation was permanent, he answered honestly that permanence was never guaranteed. Vigilance mattered more than faith. Systems must be tended continuously, or they regress. His answer was calm, as always, but firm. In time, the story of that meeting faded from conversation. New challenges emerged. New figures rose. Yet something fundamental remained altered. The silence that once shielded authority had lost its power. It no longer implied consent or fear. It had become a space where truth could enter. That was the real legacy of the calm answer. Not humiliation. Not victory. Transformation without spectacle. Years later, when the general finally stepped away from his role, there were no dramatic farewells. He left behind an institution quieter, stronger, and more self-aware than the one he had once commanded through force of personality alone. He carried with him the knowledge that his most important battle had not been fought in public or in war, but in a room where one calm answer had silenced everything he thought he knew. And in that silence, he had finally learned how to listen.